Elias lived a quiet life in the small town of Oakhaven. He was the bookbinder. His shop was near the town square, facing the largest, oldest building, the gray stone clock tower. This tower was known to everyone as the Silent Ruin. It had stood tall for over 100 years, but for the last 50, its great iron bell had not rung a single time. The hands of the huge clock face were frozen, stuck forever at 3 minutes past 12. Every day, people walked past the tower and did not even see it. It was simply part of the background, a silent reminder of a time that had stopped. Elias was a man who loved silence. He worked with old paper, soft leather, and fine thread. His days were spent mending broken stories, carefully stitching pages back into history. This work had taught him to be patient and to look closely at things that were torn or worn out. While the rest of Oakhaven accepted the tower's silence, Elias often looked at the frozen clock hands and felt a quiet, nagging puzzle. Why did time stop at that exact moment? The official story was simple. The main gear had broken, and the town ran out of money to fix it. But Elias always suspected the real reason was hidden much deeper than a simple broken piece of metal. The tower's only ground-level entrance was a heavy oak door locked with a huge, thick iron chain and a rusty, enormous padlock. The chain was so heavy it sagged in the middle. The rust was thick and orange-brown. No one in Oakhaven had the key. The door had been sealed shut decades ago by the town council, marking the end of the town's history with time. It was impossible to enter. It was impossible to climb the sheer, cold stone walls. The Silent Ruin was a solid tomb of silence. On a Tuesday morning, the town square was filled with its usual slow rhythm. The sun was warm, but the air was still cool. Mr. Henderson, the baker, was setting out his fresh rolls on a table near the fountain. Mrs. Peterson was loudly telling her neighbor about her garden problems. Children were chasing pigeons. Everything was exactly as it had been the Tuesday before and the Tuesday before that. Life in Oakhaven was a comfortable, repetitive song. Elias was just opening his shop door when the first sound ripped the peace apart. Clang! It was a terrifying noise, huge and deep, like 1,000 heavy stones hitting the ground at once. It was the sound of the great iron bell of the Silent Ruin, ringing with full, sudden power. Every sound in the square died instantly. The children froze with their hands out, ready to catch a pigeon that had not yet moved. Mrs. Peterson's mouth stayed open in the middle of a word. Mr. Henderson dropped a basket of rolls, and they rolled silently across the cobblestones. The sun still shone, but the moment felt dark. The sound was wrong. It was impossible. For a long second there was no sound at all, just held breath. Elias felt the sound shake the small wooden frame of his shop. The noise was too real to be a dream. Then came the second chime. Clang! This chime was sharper, more immediate, and it brought movement back to the town, but not normal movement. People screamed and ran away from the tower, scrambling toward the narrow streets. Mr. Henderson stood frozen, staring at the huge clock face, which was of course still showing 3 minutes past 12. But the silence had been violently broken. Before the confusion could fully break into chaos, the final sound came. Clang! 3 chimes. And then a silence that was heavier than before. This silence was not empty. It was full of fear and questions. The people started shouting, trying to cover the sound of the bell with their own voices. "It was just the wind," shouted Mr. Henderson, trying to pick up his crushed rolls. He needed a simple answer. A strong wind must have moved the top floor. "No wind makes that sound," cried a young woman, holding her baby tightly. "It was a ghost, the ghost of the old clock-keeper, Mr. Finch." Elias left the noisy, frightened crowd and walked slowly forward, right to the base of the gray stone tower. He placed his hand on the rough stone, still vibrating slightly from the powerful impact of the bell. He looked up at the sheer wall, then down at the thick iron chain on the door. It was impossible. He knew that the only way to ring that bell was to be inside the very top room. Yet the thick iron chain remained locked, untouched, and heavy. He saw no ladder marks, no rope residue, no sign of forced entry. But the sound was real. It was not a ghost. It was too physical, too mechanical. Something real had moved the clock's machinery after 50 years of cold rest. Elias, the bookbinder, felt a powerful jolt of energy. The town wanted to call it a foolish joke or a strange accident, so they could return to their slow, safe routines. But Elias saw the truth. The silent ruin had suddenly spoken. He felt like he had been reading a long, boring book for years, and a single new, urgent sentence had suddenly appeared. The tower was not a tomb. It was a puzzle box, and the 3 chimes were an invitation to solve it. He knew he could not simply go back to his shop and forget this sound. The mystery was too loud in his mind to ignore. He had to find a way inside.
The silence that followed the third clang was heavier than any sound. For a few seconds, the whole town square was frozen. Then the noise started. It was not the sound of a bell, but the sound of many people talking at once. They shouted questions and shook their heads quickly. "It was just the wind!" shouted Mr. Henderson, the baker, still looking at his spilled rolls. He sounded very sure, maybe too sure. "No wind makes that sound," said a woman named Martha. She was clutching her market bag tightly. "It was a person up there. A bad joke." But the tower had no outside steps. The only door was at the bottom, and it was locked with a large, thick iron chain and a huge, rusty padlock. No one had the key. The town council had sealed the tower shut decades ago. No one could climb up the high, gray stone walls. Elias walked slowly forward, leaving the noisy crowd behind. He walked right to the base of the tower. He looked up the sheer wall. He ran his hand over the cold, rough stone. It felt solid, like a mountain's base. There was no way for a person to get in, not even a small one, and certainly not a whole bell mechanism to start working on its own. He saw the thick chain on the old oak door. The links of the chain were dark and heavy. The padlock was the size of his fist. It looked older than he was. Elias knew then it was not a joke. It was not the wind. Something real had moved inside the silent stone structure. The thought sent a nervous energy through him, pushing away the earlier cold feeling. Everyone else was busy arguing about ghosts or bad town maintenance. They wanted a simple, easy answer, so they could go back to their day. They wanted the world to be normal again. But Elias was different. He was a bookbinder. His job was to mend old things, to look closely at broken pieces of paper and leather and stitch them back into stories. He loved things that were old and had secrets. The Silent Ruin was suddenly the biggest, oldest book in Oakhaven, and it had just opened a new, strange chapter. Elias left the square. He did not go to his shop. He walked quickly down a narrow, mossy lane towards the quiet edge of town. He needed to find the one person who knew more about this town's past than anyone else, Mrs. Gables. Mrs. Gables lived in a little house with a garden full of purple flowers. She was over 90 years old, and her memory was sharp, like a newly polished needle. She sat on her porch, watching the clouds when Elias arrived. "Mrs. Gables," Elias said, trying to catch his breath. "The clock, the tower. Did you hear the chimes?" She looked at him with calm, knowing eyes. She had thin, white hair pulled back neatly. "The 3 chimes," she said, her voice a dry whisper. "Yes, Elias. "I heard them. Did the foolish people call it the wind again?" Elias nodded. "Most of them did. Why did it chime? Do you know the real story of why the tower was closed?" Mrs. Gable sighed deeply, the sound like old paper crumbling. "The official story is that the gear broke. The gears are metal teeth, and they wore out. That's what the town council wrote down, but that's not why they sealed the door." She leaned forward slowly, her voice dropping lower. "The bell was silenced because of a man named Mr. Finch. 50 years ago, Mr. Finch was the clock keeper. He lived up there, in the very top room, to take care of the heavy machinery. Every night before the clock stopped, he would ring the bell at midnight. But one night, the bell started ringing by itself at 3 minutes past 12, just before the real midnight chime." 3 minutes past 12, Elias repeated softly. He thought of the clock hands frozen at that exact time. "It rang and rang 15 times. People woke up scared and ran to the square. They yelled for Mr. Finch to stop the terrible noise, but he didn't answer. The next morning, they broke down the first wooden lock to get in. They found the heavy bell rope swaying slowly, but they found no sign of Mr. Finch. He was completely gone. The door to his top room was locked from the inside. They never found him, not a trace of the man." Mrs. Gables pointed a shaking finger at Elias. "That's when the council sealed it up with the big iron chain you see now. They did not want the town to remember the ghost of Mr. Finch. The bell was silenced not because the gear was broken, but because the town feared what might ring it next. And now, 50 years later, it has rung again, 3 times. That is a warning, Elias. Do not go near that dark place." Elias thanked her. His mind was spinning faster than any clock gear. A man disappeared, the clock stopped at the exact moment the bell began to chime on its own, and now, half a century later, the bell rings 3 times from the locked tower. A warning? Maybe, but for Elias, it was an invitation to solve a puzzle. He bought a strong coil of thin, tough rope from the hardware store. He bought a good, bright lantern, too. He told the shop owner he needed the things for fixing a small leak in his shop's roof. He paid and quickly left, his heart thumping like a small drum. The shop owner looked at Elias's back strangely. Bookbinders did not usually need climbing gear. Elias waited. He watched the sun slide down behind the hills. He watched the light fade from the square until the air turned a deep, inky blue. Soon the market stalls were folded up. The people of Oakhaven went home, locking their doors tighter than usual. The town was quiet again, the silence deeper than before, because everyone knew what sound could break it. When the moon rose, a thin, curved sliver of light, Elias was ready. He moved like a shadow, carrying the rope and the lantern. He had a small, hard metal tool, one he used for opening old clasps on books, hidden in his coat pocket. He reached the foot of the clock tower. He placed his hand on the cold stone. The silent ruin stood tall above him, a giant sleeping guard. He knew he had to find a way inside. The door was chained, but there was a small, high opening on the side, a little stone window meant to let in air, not people. Elias looked at the tall wall, then up at the stars. He knew this was foolish, dangerous even, but the mystery of the 3 chimes was too loud in his mind to ignore.
Elias stood at the foot of the clock tower. He felt small next to the huge, dark stone wall. He held the thin, tough rope in his hand. He looked up at the small stone window, maybe 10 feet up. It was only meant to let air flow, not people. This was the only way in, as the main door was sealed by the thick, heavy chain. He swung the end of the rope carefully. It had a small hook he had made from bending his bookbinding tool. He aimed for a sharp corner of stone just above the little window. It took him 4 tries. On the 5th try, he heard a solid thump as the hook caught and held firm. He pulled the rope hard, testing it. The hook did not move. He put the bright lantern's loop over his shoulder.
He started to climb. The stone was rough and cold against his hands. It was a difficult climb. He was not a climber. He was a bookbinder. His muscles quickly began to shake and burn. He pulled himself up slowly, trying not to think about how far down the cold, hard cobblestones were. When he reached the window, he had to take a deep breath and rest for a long minute. The opening was small, smaller than he thought. He had to squeeze. He pushed his shoulders in first, then his chest. The stone felt hard against his bones and his coat tore slightly. He held his breath and pushed with his feet, wriggling through the narrow space like a snake in a hole. With a final desperate shove, he fell inward. He landed softly on a deep, thick layer of dust inside the tower. The air was old and heavy. It smelled like dry dirt, forgotten metal, and the quiet scent of stone that has not seen the sun in 50 years. Elias coughed, kicking up more dust. He lifted the lantern and clicked the switch. A small, yellow circle of light pushed back the total blackness. He was in a small, round room. It was completely empty, except for a winding stone staircase that went up into the darkness. This was the entrance room, the one just inside the great oak door. He looked back at the door. The thick wooden oak was covered with spider webs. He could see the large, round shadow of the padlock through a crack. It was solid. No one had come in that way. Elias saw a wooden bench pushed against the curved wall. It was nearly covered by a blanket of gray dust. He walked to it slowly, his boots leaving clear tracks in the thick dust. He found a small, leather-bound notebook lying on the bench. He picked it up. It was stiff with age. He wiped the cover clean with his sleeve. The cover was blank, but when he opened it, he saw small, neat handwriting. The last date written was the exact day Mr. Finch disappeared, 50 years ago. Elias held the light closer. The last entry was short and strange. It did not talk about the clock or the weather. It simply read, "The small, bright noise is here again. It waits for the 3." Elias tucked the book deep into his inner coat pocket. The message made no sense, but it felt important. The small, bright noise. He did not hear any noise now, except his own heart beating fast. He started up the stone staircase. The steps were made of dark, heavy stone, worn smooth in the center where Mr. Finch's feet had climbed them many thousands of times. Elias went up and up. The circular wall felt tight around him. The air grew thinner and colder the higher he went. After climbing what felt like 100 steps, he reached the next level. This room was not small. It was huge, big enough to hold a small house. This was the main working room of the clock. The lantern light showed a tangle of metal. Large brass gears filled the space, some taller than Elias. They were the color of old gold and completely silent. They were the teeth that used to count the time for the whole town. Now they were asleep, covered in dust and cobwebs. He saw the huge, thick iron rods that ran up through the ceiling, rods that connected to the great clock hands outside. He walked carefully around the heavy machinery. He found the place where the mechanism was broken. It was just as Mrs. Gables had said. A large, important tooth on a central gear was snapped clean off. The clock could never work again with this damage. He then moved to the center of the room. From here, he could see the thick ropes that went up to the bell room. They hung down, dusty and still. He knew Mr. Finch had pulled those ropes every night. As he walked, he noticed something strange on the dusty floor, away from the machinery. The dust was thick and even, but there, right by a wall, was a very small, clear print. It was too small to be his boot, and it was too small to be a grown man's shoe. It looked like the sole of a child's shoe, a child who had stepped in the dust very recently. Elias felt a new wave of fear mixed with wonder. Had someone else been here since the seal was broken by the 3 chimes? He looked at the tiny footprint. It did not lead toward the spiral stairs he had just climbed. It led to a dark, hidden corner of the room. Elias slowly raised the lantern and followed the print. It stopped at the floor against the stone wall. The wall here was different. It had a faint, thin line. Elias pressed his hand against the stone. It felt smooth, like a cut. He pushed harder. With a low grinding sound, a section of the stone floor, about the size of a small door, dropped down 1 inch. It was a hidden stone trapdoor. It had been pulled open and then carefully closed again. Elias was about to pull the heavy stone up when he heard it. Not the giant clang of the bell, but a small, busy, and very close noise. Tick, tick, tick. Tick, tick, tick. It was the sound of a small clock, perfectly working, and it was coming from right under the hidden stone trap door.
Elias dropped to his knees. The tick, tick, tick coming from under the stone slab was clear and urgent. It was the sound of life in a place that had been dead for 50 years. The noise was small, but it was busy, telling him that something important was moving right under his hand. He reached down and found the edge of the heavy stone trapdoor. It was cold and slippery with thin, ancient dust. He used the hook of his bookbinding tool to get a better grip. He pushed, grunted, and pulled with all his strength. The muscles in his arms and back screamed from the sudden work. His whole body ached from the earlier climb, but the sound of the little clock drove him on. Finally, with a loud, rough scraping sound against the stone floor, the slab moved. Elias quickly pulled it up and pushed it onto its side, revealing the black hole beneath. A small black hole opened in the floor. Cold air, different from the heavy dead air above, rushed up and hit his face. This air smelled clean and sharp, like fresh oil and strong metal, a working smell. Elias held the lantern low over the edge. Below him, an old wooden ladder went straight down into the darkness. He did not think twice. He carefully swung his legs over the edge and started to climb down. The wood was solid, but felt very old and smooth from long use. He went down 10, then 12 rungs, until his feet touched a floor made of packed earth. He was in a small round room, much smaller than the giant gear room above, but this room was completely different. It was not dusty at all. The floor was swept clean. The air was fresh. This was a secret workshop. It was not a storage room. Along the curved stone walls, tools were hung neatly on wooden pegs. Small, shining hammers, tiny pliers, and thin, sharp files waited in perfect order. Each tool had a painted outline on the wall behind it showing where it belonged. A large wooden workbench stood in the center, bathed in the yellow light of Elias's lantern. The workbench was covered in parts, not the huge rusted metal pieces from the main clock above, but delicate, tiny pieces of metal, silver wires, polished brass springs, and gears the size of a thumbnail. It looked like a very tidy jeweler's table. Everything was spotless and cared for. The tick, tick, tick was now very loud, seeming to shake the small room. Elias turned toward the sound. On the workbench, sitting on a square of worn red velvet cloth, was the source of the noise. It was a beautiful, small, silver object. It looked like a pocket watch that had been taken apart and put into a clear glass dome. It had many small gears turning quickly and perfectly. It had no hands and no numbers. It did not tell the hour of the day. This had to be the small, bright noise Mr. Finch wrote about in his hidden journal. It shone brightly even in the dim lantern light, reflecting the flame. Elias stood still, just watching the busy little machine. He had found the heart of the mystery. Then, a voice came from the shadows. It was quiet, clear, and calm. "You should not have used the heavy rope.
It left deep marks on the stone outside. My grandfather taught me to only use silk line." Elias jumped back, holding the lantern up high. The light fell on the corner of the room, revealing a low wooden stool. Sitting on the stool was a small person. It was a girl, no older than 9 or 10, wearing a thick dark blue coat. Her hair was braided tightly down her back, and her face was serious and clean. She was holding something tightly in one small hand. She did not look afraid or surprised to see him. She looked like she had been expecting him all along. "Who are you?" Elias asked, his voice shaking a little. "How did you get here? The tower is sealed." The girl slid off the stool and walked toward him. She moved with a quiet certainty. "My name is Lily. I am here because someone has to be. The tower is never truly locked, only forgotten by the people who live outside." She stopped near the workbench and pointed at the silver clock. "You heard that, didn't you? The small clock. It is the key to everything. It keeps the real time." Elias looked at the small clock, then back at the tiny footprint he had seen in the dust on the floor above. "Was that your shoe print? And did you ring the bell? Why? It made everyone in the town afraid." Lily nodded slowly. She held up the object in her hand. It was a piece of metal, a broken brass gear tooth, the same one that had snapped off the great clock above, but she had polished it until it glowed like a new copper coin. "I needed to know if the sound would still travel," Lily explained in simple terms. "The large bell rope is stuck up in the bell room, too heavy to move. I tied a thin piece of kite thread to this broken gear and climbed up through the final access shaft. I swung the broken gear like a hammer until it hit the bell 3 times. 3 rings means ready in the old code my grandfather left for me." "The old code? Who was your grandfather?" Lily pointed up to the ceiling where the main gear room was. "Mr. Finch, the old clock keeper. He was my grandfather. He did not disappear. He left Oakhaven because the town did not understand his work. He built this secret room 50 years ago, right before he went away. He knew the big clock was broken and was only telling people that time passed. He believed time should be counted only when something important happens, when someone learns a lesson, or makes a promise, or starts a new path. He called this event time." She walked to a section of the wall where several old, clean maps were pinned up. One was a hand-drawn picture of the large clock's gears. Beside it was a simple portrait of a kind-looking old man with a long beard. "He told me the official time, hours, minutes, days, was like background noise. The real clock is this one, and it keeps the count of important events. It is a timer that only starts when a real change happens in the town." "So why ring the bell now?" Elias asked, pulling Mr. Finch's dusty notebook from his pocket. "The small, bright noise waits for the 3. What does it mean?" Lily smiled, a wide, serious smile. "It means the small clock has finished its first count. It means a new person has finally cared enough about the real time to climb into the darkness and look for the truth. The 3 chimes were not a warning, Elias. They were a signal for you. It means the time is now ready for the next person to keep the watch." Elias held the small notebook tightly. The words Lily spoke made his head spin. He was a bookbinder. He fixed worn pages and leather covers. He did not fix time. "Me?" Elias asked, pointing to his chest. "I do not know how to keep a watch. I can hardly climb a rope. I am not like your grandfather, Mr. Finch." Lily looked at him with her serious, steady eyes. She sat down again on the low wooden stool. "My grandfather knew the town needed a bookbinder to keep the watch," she said. "The official time is for everyone, the people who only look at the face of the clock. But event time is about stories. It is about when a chapter ends and a new one begins. Only a bookbinder knows how to find the important moment in a long story. She stood up and walked to the workbench. She pointed to the small silver clock under the glass dome. It was still ticking quickly, a busy small heart in the quiet room. The town is asleep, Elias. It has been asleep for 50 years since my grandfather left, Lily explained. The large clock broke because the town stopped having real events. Everyone does the same things every day. No one makes a big, brave choice. No one changes their mind about a deep, important thing. Elias thought about Oakhaven. He thought about Mrs. Gables always complaining, and the mayor always saying the same things. He realized Lily was right. Nothing ever truly changed. When the big clock stopped, the town forgot how to change, Lily continued. But my grandfather made this small clock. It is built to count one cycle, 50 years. That is how long it took for one person, you, to finally look up and wonder why the clock was silent. Your climbing the rope and searching for the truth is the first event in 50 years. Lily reached under the workbench and pulled out a small wooden box. It was a simple, plain box, but it was very heavy. She opened the lid. Inside, resting on blue velvet, were 3 things. The first was a brass magnifying lens with a smooth, dark wooden handle. It was the tool of an observer, a tool for seeing small details clearly. The second was a small, thin metal spring, coiled tight like a sleeping snake. It looked important, like the heart of a tiny machine. The third was a single long feather, pale gray and smooth, from a bird Elias did not recognize. Lily picked up the metal spring. "This is the last piece of the event time clock," she said. "It is called the moment spring. The small clock is running now, but it is running too fast. It counted 50 years in a moment. To slow it down, to make it keep time correctly for the next 50 years, this spring must be put back in its place." She put the spring back and closed the box. "But my grandfather taught me that a clockkeeper does not fix things with just tools. He fixes things with the truth. To put the spring in, we must wait for the next event in Oakhaven." "What kind of event?" Elias asked, feeling a strange new hope. "A small change that is a very big change for one person," she said. "For example, someone finally telling the truth after many years of lying, or someone stopping a bad habit forever. It must be a change that moves the whole story forward." Lily picked up the brass magnifying lens and gave it to Elias. "This is your tool. You are the watchman of event time now. You must go back to the town. You must read the people like you read books. Look past the cover. Look for the new words they are writing in their hearts." She also gave him the gray feather. "Keep this feather with you. It is a reminder to be light and quick. It is a sign that when you see the next big change, you must bring the feather and the notebook back to me. The secret of where the spring goes is hidden inside the words of the notebook, but only after the next event happens." Elias felt the weight of the brass magnifying lens in his hand. It was cold and real. It was no longer a game. It was a true mission. He was not just a bookbinder anymore. "What will you do here?" Elias asked Lily. "I will wait. I will keep the workshop clean and listen to the small clock run too fast." She said, "And I will listen for the sound of someone in town finally making a true choice." Elias knew he could not stay. He had to go back to the dusty sunlight and look at the faces of the people he knew. He turned toward the wooden ladder. He climbed up and out of the clean, quiet workshop, back into the dust-filled room with the huge, silent gears. He carefully replaced the stone trapdoor, pushing it back until the edges fit perfectly and the floor looked whole again. The dust he had disturbed covered his clothes. He then climbed the winding stone stairs back down to the small entry room. When he reached the small window, he took one last deep breath of the tower's cold, old air. He tucked the brass lens, the feather, and Mr. Finch's notebook deep inside his coat. He used the rope one last time, slowly lowering himself back down onto the cobblestones of the silent town square. The heavy iron chain on the great doors seemed to mock him, but Elias now knew the chain was only a show. The real door was the secret under the floor.
Elias walked out of the square, past the fountain. The town looked the same, but to Elias, it was entirely new. It was a giant book, and he was searching for the one sentence that would change everything. The weight of the feather felt lighter than the weight of his new responsibility. The small, bright noise of the silver clock was now counting inside his head.